Welcome to Start the Conversation, your go-to series for short, impactful learning videos brought to you by Inclusive Change. Let's dive in to today's topic and start the conversation.
Hi everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I am Becca. So I work for Inclusive Change as an operations support specialist. And the purpose of today's video is to do a little bit of training around Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, or RSD for short, as it's otherwise known. So the purpose of today's video is to learn about what rejection sensitivity dysphoria is, how it can show up in us, and the strategies that we deploy to manage when it strikes. So throughout this training, I'm going to be speaking about the symptoms of RSD, e.g. how it shows up physically and emotionally. And I am going to give everybody a trigger warning, as there is a mention of suicidal ideation in slide 6 of this presentation. If this is a subject that is triggering for you, please feel free to skip forward in the recorded version or put your speakers on mute throughout the delivery of that part of the talk. Okay? What is rejection sensitivity dysphoria? Now, one of the things I'd like to acknowledge is that when we hear that word rejection, we might apply it as, or neurotypical people, might apply it to the most common experience for somebody maybe in the dating scene. So I have, as a fan of memes and GIFs, I have included this little joke of here, because feeling rejection is unpleasant for anybody who experiences it. And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. Nobody likes being rejected. We as human beings like feeling valued and we like feeling validated. So rejection is unpleasant for everybody, even neurotypical people. An example of rejection can be declining for a job interview, for example, being let down for a date, or having someone deny you something that you need in a shopping environment. For example, there's no cornflakes on the shelf and they're out of stock, and you feel like that person is potentially not looking. That's a problem that we've all come across, I'm sure. So as neurodiverse people, we're predisposed to experiencing sensory overwhelm at much more frequent rates, which means that we will experience physical and emotional reactions much more intensely than someone neurotypical would. I'd like you all to bear this in mind throughout this presentation, as it's a key piece of information to understanding our lived experience of RSD. So, what is rejection sensitive dysphoria? What is RSD? In simple terms, rejection sensitivity is when the individual feels real pain as a result of perceived criticism and, by extension, rejection. So, rejection sensitivity is considered a neurodiversity in its own right. However, it frequently co-occurs alongside other neurodiversities, for example, ADHDers, the autistic community, and survivors of CPTSD. Now, there is a significant amount of research available which shows a correlation between RSD as a trauma response, which I will come on to later. But the key things to understand are the difference between rejection and RSD. The former causes an unpleasant feeling to, say, somebody neurotypical, and the other causes physical and emotional pain that stops that person continuing their day-to-day activities as normal. So the word dysphoria is Greek for unbearable, and that refers to the emotional and physical pain that someone feels in that moment. It's thought that RSD affects nearly 100% of the ADHD community throughout their lives. And while the scholarly research is somewhat lacking in evidence, the autistic community colloquially described their experiences with RSD being extremely high, particularly among women and the trans and people of colour and non-binary communities as well. What causes RSD? As I said at the beginning of the training, I am a big fan of memes because I do feel like it's important to make light of dark things. The common triggers for RSD really vary across real or perceived rejection, teasing that individual, so for example, for their mannerisms, appearance, criticism or feedback, whether it's constructive or otherwise, and persistent negative self-talk instigated by real or perceived failure. For example, feedback within the workplace and how it's delivered and received, that's a really common trigger for RSD. And it causes that individual a lot of anxiety if they don't receive any context for that feedback in particular. So, what does it emotionally feel like? For neurotypical people, or non-ADHDers, or people who are not part of the autistic community, RSD can seem really difficult to comprehend because it seems like an extreme reaction to what might not seem like very much. But emotional dysregulation will trigger the physical pain we feel. The extreme emotional reactions, usually in part to our predisposed sensory sensitivities, ADHDers will speak about feeling intense, nauseating rage, fear, dejection, and perhaps most crucially, suicidal ideation as well. There does seem to be a correlation between RSD and trauma responses. So that's where the person will experience fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses as a result of their strong emotional reactions. They also report feeling quite hopeless, dejected, and this is something that has been reported back from the autistic community as well, as we've started to see more prevalence of RSD in that community. Due to the intense emotional reactions triggered, physical pain will flood the body of somebody experiencing RSD. So an example that I like to use is the feeling of being punched in the chest or stomach as somebody who experiences RSD, feeling my heart start to beat really fast, getting a really hot red face, an intense fear flooding my system, triggering my fight, flight, freeze or fawn response. So for me, I tend to go into freeze and fawn. Fawning is very much pleasing the person in that scenario in order to stop what's happening. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. Other people who experience RSD will describe white hot knives stabbing them, prickly skin, feeling quite nauseous as well. That's really common. And some people, the pain of rejection sensitivity dysphoria is just beyond words because they're so triggered, they can't describe the feeling. And I do feel like there's an important point to add here as well, is that for ADHDs or for the autistic community, when you add in the co-occurring traits of, say, alexithymia, which is not being able to recognize your own or other people's emotions, that can make an already intense experience much more confusing and frightening for them. So that's really something to bear in mind as well. Understanding the triggers can be a huge first step, as well as keeping an eye on whether somebody is experiencing RSD. So here I've included some outward signs of RSD. In children and teens, this can look like fear of social rejection, emotional overreaction, difficulty regulating emotions, social anxiety, perfectionism, low self-esteem. And in adults with ADHD, this can be pretty similar, to be honest with you, as you can see here. But it is important to understand what it looks like outwardly in a bit more detail. So this could look like, for example, in a workplace setting, sudden emotional outbursts following real or perceived criticism or rejection. Visible exhaustion, so that person may well not sleep because they've been experiencing such emotional pain and their thoughts are racing, especially within the ADHD community. Visibly agitated in the moment as well. So for people who are neurodiverse, that may present as them stimming or perhaps pacing around the room, so really seeming like they are physically agitated. Avoiding social settings when they might fail or be criticised. So this can look like pathological demand avoidance in the autistic community. This can also look avoiding meetings, one-to-ones. It can avoid being things like ignoring emails that have said, can I borrow you for 5 minutes of your time with no context. It can also be due to people taking a lot of sick days. That can be something to keep in mind as well. Low self-esteem and poor self-perception. So if somebody is constantly criticising themselves or giving themselves really harsh self-talk, or they really do seem like they are struggling and talking badly of themselves, that is another symptom of RSD as well. I don't know if we have any Disney fans who are watching this training, but a really good example that I like to use is joy and sadness from Inside Out. An example of how RSD can be triggered. Hey, great job on that report. You did make some spelling mistakes. To which sadness, hearing mistake, has gone, oh no, I'm terrible I can't do a really good sadness interruption. So I'm really sorry, you'll have to imagine that, but I'm terrible at my job. I'm terrible at everything. I should just quit and go home and cry. So from an outside perspective, that's not gone very well. And there are a few things that we could do to stop that from happening. Something else I wanted to mention as well. Why is it important to understand RSD? Fostering a supportive work environment is beneficial for all neurotypes. So having an environment where we are mindful of the feedback that we're giving and receiving is really important, because it means that you care about the people that you're working with, first of all, but also it's a great way of increasing productivity. It's a great way of increasing somebody's value within their team. It will also, it has been shown, increase retention in neurodiverse employees. So there was a study done, which I will link and send out to anybody who's interested, by Beautiful Minds, Leaders Edge, which is run by a university in America, which showed that Microsoft, SAP, JP Morgan and Chase, and EY, which are 4 of the largest US neurodiverse hiring programs, They reported a retention rate of more than 90% of their colleagues who identified as neurodiverse because of their change management structure and their acceptance and way that they manage their neurodiverse employees. Now, if that doesn't speak volumes, I'm not sure what does. Despite these figures, though, 1/5 of neurodivergent workers have experienced workplace discrimination. And that's according to the CIPD in 2024. So despite those figures, it is something that's still a problem. So how do we recognize RSD? How do we help this? We put strategies in place that can help. So strategies that can help that individual person. So if you are watching this and you are somebody that thinks, oh, this sounds a little bit like me, and you want to be able to learn how to manage your rejection sensitive dysphoria, name it when it happens. That is probably one of the key things to recognize. If you call it out in the moment, when you realize that your heartbeat is kicking off, you feel that pain in your chest, identify it, call it out, and validate your feelings. So what we really want to avoid is falling into a trap of, oh my goodness, why am I feeling like this? I shouldn't be feeling like this, because that starts the spiral, and that's something we're trying to avoid. So validate your feelings. Take a moment to take a deep breath and go, I'm feeling angry right now, and that's okay. Take a break to reflect. So if it's possible to, in a workplace setting, take 5 minutes to reflect on that situation and see if you can identify any possible triggers that have caused that RSD. Another really important one, especially for people in the autistic community, is to ask for tone tags on your messages. Because one of the key things we've identified working with the autistic community is that when there are no tone tags on messages, it can become very abstract and confusing to understand what that person is trying to, say, convey in their messages. So putting something like a tone tag that says friendly, supportive, whatever message you're trying to convey is a really good way of potentially stopping any RSD from occurring, because the intent of that original message is immediately clear to somebody who might not be very good at, as she says, reading between the lines. Find safe people at work to talk to. So finding somebody that you can trust, who you could potentially unmask with or speak to them openly about those experiences you're having. Now, it has been shown that when we are more upfront about neurodiversity in the workplace, we're more likely to receive positive responses socially, and people will listen to us and actually take our feedback on board as well. So finding somebody that you can talk to about it is incredibly important to be able to remediate. As now, strategies for co-workers and managers, because I'm not going to lie to everybody watching this. It is relatively difficult to manage everybody's expectations when you've got to try and manage a team that's neurodiverse and has neurotypical people in as well. Trying to find a one-size-fits-all approach is probably not going to work half the time. But what is going to work is essentially employing strategies that are a little bit more mindful about the language that you're using, because it will make everybody feel like they're being listened to. One thing I like to employ is called the feedback sandwich technique. I'm not sure for the purposes of this video if you've heard the sweary colloquial version, but it's when you layer your feedback. So you give a positive response of, hey, great job on that report, really well written. My constructive feedback goes in the middle. So my constructive feedback would be that perhaps there were a few too many commas in your sentence list. So the next time, could we make sure that we are reviewing those in a way that is a little bit more meticulous? But other than that, layering in the good feedback again, really well done in your report. Feedback sandwich. The bad bit goes in the middle. Be mindful of the language you use. Again, this does go back to tone tags as well. If you can employ tone tags, that is hugely helpful. But try and avoid things like accusatory tones. Why haven't you done this? Is likely to somebody with RSD set off a reaction of, oh my goodness, why haven't I done this? And a whole spiral of, I am terrible at my job, I might as well pack up my desk and go home. Which seems like a huge reaction, but it is something to be mindful of, because 9 times out of 10, that person hasn't done anything wrong. It's just feedback that needs to be delivered in a constructive way. Contextualize meetings. Saying to somebody, can I borrow you for 5 minutes, if they suffer with rejection sensitive dysphoria, if you don't contextualize why you need them for 5 minutes, they're likely to think, oh my goodness, why am I needed? So saying, hey, can I borrow you for 5 minutes? It's nothing at all to worry about. It's so that we can go through a plan for, I think on my presentation, I'd put next week's report. It's so we can go through a plan for our next network lead meeting, or it's so we can go through our plan of action before we meet with the head of communications in a few weeks' time. Something like that is so helpful because, again, with a tone tag, that would go very well with someone with RSD. And then another really crucial thing that I've seen making a huge difference is adopting a no-blame culture. So for a short period of time, if you'll indulge me for a moment in a professional story, I worked for Lloyd's Banking Group. And one of the things that they did really was having a no-blame culture as well as giving feedback sandwich technique, which was really helpful. Having a no-blame culture means that we don't go, this is your fault. If somebody's made a mistake, what we would do is we would pull them into a meeting and say, can I borrow you for 5 minutes to go through some feedback for XYZ piece of work? And we'd go through a concept called the 5 whys. So we would break down why the mistake was made, why did that mistake happen? 9 times out of 10, it goes back to training. But the end of that message was that it's not your fault. And really, when someone makes a mistake at work or if there is feedback that needs to be given, it's not their fault. And then I've included a very funny gift because half the time, sometimes it's helpful just to brace yourself for feedback because feedback is an inevitable part of working in a professional environment. There are always going to be gives and takes on both sides, but being mindful about how we're delivering feedback is the most crucial way of doing that. So that concludes my little presentation on rejection sensitive dysphoria. Thank you so much for listening. If any of you have any questions or there's anything that we can help with, please do reach out to us at Inclusive Change and we'll be more than happy to clarify for you. But thank you for watching and speak to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Start the Conversation. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe for more insightful content from Inclusive Change. See you next time.